Hello, my name is Giorgos Christides. I'm a reporter for German news magazine Der Spiegel in Greece. I'm very happy to be here back in Delphi. I've been here many times before. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm also even more excited to have with me such a distinguished guest, Mr. Michael Møller, who used to be an Undersecretary of the United Nations. He used to be a Director General of the United Nations office in Geneva and is currently the chairman of the Diplomacy Forum of the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, or known shortly as GESDA. Mr. Møller, I think we'll have a very, very interesting conversation about what multilateralism means in this time, what it needs to be done to change and become more effective, what challenges humanity faces, and what it is exactly that his organization is doing to bring about a better world and bring about changes that will help the entire humanity all over the globe. Thank you for being here, sir. I would like us to begin by simply describing what it is exactly your foundation, which is based in Geneva, is doing, and explain to our audience what this is all about.
Thank you very much, Giorgio, and hello everyone, very happy to be here. So GESDA is a foundation that was created by the Swiss government together with the government of Geneva to do the following in very simple terms. We are asked to scan what's happening in the laboratories and the universities around the world and assess the science that is coming at us, the new technologies, over the next 5, 10, 25 years. Bring the scientists that are working on these issues that we identify as the most promising together what we call the diplomacy actors, but in fact are the potential end users. They could be either UN organizations, they could be governments, they can be NGOs, they can be whoever is in the business of making life better for humankind. And put these two groups together that never really speak to each other very much, have a different language, a different entry point, and to get them to agree on which of these things are the most adept to turn into tools to improve the capacity of those who are tasked with increasing the well-being of humankind over the next 25 years and beyond. And sorry, I have to be closer. All right, thank you. Sorry about that. I tend to do that. It's I never learn. This is now coming out of its startup phase. It was just 2 weeks ago extended by the government for 10 years, and we had our financing tripled, which I think is a pretty good validation of the work we've done so far. It has been really quite an incredible journey. It's the only organization of its kind so far, and we'll go a bit further into what we're doing and in what areas of science that we're working. But so far, a surprisingly good success.
So essentially what your organization does, what your foundation does is scour the world, scout what is happening in laboratories around the world, scout what the new technologies are promising in 5, 10, 25-year intervals, and seeing how you can take this, bring it to governments, to local actors, to civil society, and with this help things improve in various sectors. Is this correct?
It's correct. It's also the secondary, if you want, or parallel objective is that with this we hope to provide a proof of concept of a new kind of multilateralism. We're leveraging the fact that the science community across the world is probably one of the only, if not the only community that has managed and still manages to collaborate across geographic and political divides to an extent that most of us don't. And to use that and take that example to show and prove a fairly simple proposition that it's better to work together than not. And I think that this is particularly important in the time we're in now, where we are facing the fact that the multilateralism that has given us extraordinary well-being over the past 80 years simply doesn't work anymore. And we can come back to why, but the fact is that we need to rethink how we are going to be working together, rethink the very fact of the idea that we must work together, not how, just as a nice to have proposition, but really as an imperative if we are going to be able to face the extraordinary existential problems that we are all faced with. So if we can do that, then we will have done two things. We will have brought back science to the policy setting table and the decision making table, which is very much needed as well in terms of finding solutions. And we will have helped, or pushed a little bit at least, the world to come back to a multilateral and collaborative way of working. This new multilateralism has to be collaborative, it has to be integrated, it has to be de-siloed, it has to be preventive. If we manage to do that, then we will be well on our way. But right now, it's a slug.
I have heard you say that that if we ask anyone, any human living on Earth since time immemorial, and ask where would you like to live in terms of securing your basic needs, of living a happy life, of fulfilling your destiny, this would be it, and that multilateralism had a lot to do with this and has delivered decades of prosperity around the world. So I'm wondering, why are you saying that multilateralism is failing at the moment, and how should it change?
It's failing. Well, I mean, it's a fact that we tend to forget. The international structure that the world gave itself after the Second World War, and already starting after the First World War, has provided humanity with a level of peace, a level of rights, and a level of well-being that we have never had before in the whole history of humankind. And this happened in 80 years, a blink of an eye in historical terms. But it also had a price, and the price tag and the bill is coming to us now. It means that the planet that is in dire straits, and environmentally, one pandemic after the other, widening discrepancies between the haves and the have-nots, etc. We all know the problems, and they need to be fixed. The problem, of course, is that the structures that we have, including the way that the multilateral system has worked until now, is simply no longer able to deal with the long-term existential challenges that we have in front of us. Our political systems are short-term, 3-4 years, and then elections, etc. And it makes it very difficult for leaders, politicians, etc., to take decisions that are long-term. And that gap is widening. It's not getting smaller. So there's a structural issue, there's a political issue, but the fact is that we have the knowledge, we have the experience, we have the human capital, we have the financial capital to actually do what it takes. We know what the problems are, we know what the solutions are. It takes collective will, it takes political will at a much greater level than we've had until now. And this is what we need to work on, and which very much me and my colleagues in this organization is trying to bring in a very operational way through the bringing of science in a collaborative way. Let me give you a little anecdote from when we brought the scientists and the politicians together for the first time, which I thought was very positive. In spite of the fact that I said that these are two different languages that don't speak to each other, we put them together, we gave them a bunch of scientific papers, we asked them to prioritize them in terms of the work that the foundation should do, and they did that very quickly, and they agreed between themselves. This is people who have never spoken to each other before, very senior scientists, very senior diplomats, UN types and governments. And but then they turned around and said, here are your priorities, but we have agreed, all of us, unanimously, that there are 3 things that you need to take care of when you deal with this and when you push forward on this. Ethics, governance, and equity. A lot of the science that is coming at us at a great speed, much faster than most people are able to adapt to, is produced and developed and deployed in the private sector. There is no governance, there's no adult supervision, if I put it this way. There are no rules, really, to speak of. And the ethical aspect is sometimes forgotten and put aside for profit. And the equity issue is equally important. When we do come up with new technologies that are going to have an incredible effect on our lives, much more than most of us realize, it has to be accessible to everybody on this planet, not just people in the north. So this is very much the foundation of what we work on. There's a couple of fairly simple but very important questions that underpin what the ethos, if you want. And that is, what is it going to mean to be human in the age of robots, of gene editing, or of other technological challenges? And how are we going to figure out to live together? Which technologies can we deploy to help reduce inequality and foster inclusive development and well-being? And the third is, how can we ensure the well-being of humankind and the sustainable health of our planet? How can we supply the world population with the necessary food and energy while regenerating our planet? These are fairly fundamental questions, all of which can be addressed and will be addressed through technology as we go along. And if we use the technology in a smart way, and we ensure that it's used for the benefit of humanity, and we make sure that most of these technologies that have dual use capacities are used in the right way, then we will have done our job properly.
I would like to mention three specific examples and have your take on these, please. First of all, how would you rate COVID, the world's response to COVID so far? On the one hand, you had some extremely fast collaboration between private and public sector. You had record speed development of life-saving vaccines and medicine. But on the other hand, this has been hugely unequally distributed across the globe. That's number one, if you consider it a success of multilateralism or of merging private and public sector. Secondly, I will just mention them briefly. And secondly, you have the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which kind of appended the social security apparatus that we in Europe had been used to for decades. So one has to wonder, how can it be that multilateralism has a future when on the one hand you have liberal democracies and on the other hand you have countries like Russia or perhaps also China who are not so focused on such things as human rights. And thirdly, you mentioned, for example, eradicating food shortages, and we see the UN itself projecting that by 2030 we will have missed the target, and 7% of the global population will be in poverty rate.
All right. Well, all of these are a good example of where we are now. COVID, you asked me what I thought about that. I think it was both a great example of fantastic multilateral collaboration, the way that science got together and provided a vaccine in less than a year, when it normally takes 10 years plus to provide to come up with new vaccines. I thought it was an abysmal failure in terms of. In terms of how we collaborated to make sure that everybody on this planet got vaccinated. When I say abysmal failure, I think I'm being kind. I think that the fact that we did not collaborate amongst countries and that there was hoarding and everybody bought their vaccines or several times the number of vaccines they really needed and did not share with those probably more in need, but certainly just as much in need, has prolonged the pandemic and has meant probably several hundred thousands of deaths that were not necessary. So I don't feel that that was a success. It was a success on one hand, it was not a success on the other. Ukraine, multilateralism. When we speak, let me just remind you of the fact that when we speak of multilateralism, we're not just speaking about Europe. We are speaking about the whole world. And multilateralism is doing quite well in other places of the planet. The fact that it is not at all doing well in the European theater right now is a catastrophe, no question about it. But it doesn't mean that multilateralism is either dead or a wrong approach to things. It just means that we need more of it, and we need to have our structures, like the Security Council of the UN, to work as it was intended to. So there's a whole issue that we don't have time to get into here about the reform of the system, of the multilateral system, that needs to be undertaken, and that needs to be undertaken quite rapidly. And in terms of the multilateral aspect of our well-being and the fact that poverty is back because of the pandemic, and a number of there's setbacks in education, big ones in certain parts of the world. The Sustainable Development Goals have been put back as well and are not being implemented as fast as they ought to be. Is a bump in the road. I'm not playing down the problems, but the fact is that we are going to move forward because we have no choice. The existential problems that we're faced with are of such magnitude today that unless we find ways of working together much, much better than we've ever done before, we are simply not going to make it. It's as stark as that. I think that every indicator shows it. We just got a report from the IIIC 2 days ago that shows us that the tipping point for climate change and for the 1.5 or 2% threshold is coming at us very, very quickly. And unless we do stuff within the next 3 years now, we may not be able to get to where we need to go. So there's a whole series of these elements that are pushing us. You know, necessity is the mother of invention, and that is certainly coming into play in the way that that these crises and these problems are coming at us. On the other side, we are having the technology, new technologies that are coming at us at enormous speed. And here again, we have a problem. We have the problem that our societies, our governance, at all levels, our individual citizens are simply not ready for the impact of these technologies in their lives. So they need to be helped with adaptation. There needs to be massive education. There needs to be massive information. And this all speaks to a real strong look at ourselves in our different businesses, journalists that need to figure out whether they're doing their job the proper way, schools and educational systems that need to really take a hard look at how they educate our youngsters to actually be able not just to adapt to these new technologies, but also to run the world in a very completely different environment. That brings me to just to give you the four platforms on which we work. One is quantum and artificial intelligence. The second is human augmentation. I mentioned the question of what it means to be human in the era of robots, etc. The third one is geoengineering. How are we going to be able to use the new technologies to address the climate problems and the environmental problems, decarbonization, etc. And the fourth one we call science and diplomacy. How are we going to be able to use new technologies, artificial intelligence, blockchain, quantum, etc., to be better at making peace, be better at mediating, and be better at creating the structures of governance that need to be better if we're going to not only solve the problems ahead of us, but also manage a world that is going to be very, very different than the one we are used to now.
I think we're running out of time, but just a final question, because you mentioned AI, and if someone reads the work your foundation has been doing, one reads about artificial intelligence, brain implants, several things that question what humanity really is. And I'm just wondering, in our time, people are so polarized, and the social media are so polarized, and people are so at each other's throats. How are we going to educate the public in terms of such controversial things as what it means to transplant memories or chips or stuff like that in the next couple of decades? I'm really curious about that.
It's a challenge. I agree with you. And this is it's a challenge to all of us. I don't have the answers to most of that, but I'm just putting out the proposition that we have to do it, and there is absolutely no way out of it. We have to figure out, and things are happening. I mean, it's not as if everybody has been waiting around for these for being pushed by JESDA or others. You are seeing great strides in education, in educating also the citizen. It's happening mostly at city level and at communal level, not necessarily at the national level. But I don't care what levels it's happening at, as long as it happens. And what I find really positive is when you look at how the Sustainable Development Goals, the sort of operational roadmap that we all have, and that gives us the answers of how we have to move forward. when you look at how they are being implemented at the very local level, grassroots level, city, village level, you're seeing innovative approaches that are quite astounding, that need to be leveraged and the dots connected so that we can learn from each other, which is also one of the things that is in play right now. My big problem is that a lot of these reactions and new ideas and out-of-the-box thinking and innovations are not happening fast enough. I'm telling you that we deal with thousands of scientists, top scientists around the world, and the stuff they're telling us and the stuff they're showing us that is already happening is happening so fast and is going to have such a fundamental influence on our lives that we really have to pay attention and we have to get moving.
Thank you, Michael. Anyone interested in learning a lot more about all this can visit the website of JESDA, which is at jesda.global, where they can find much more information and more details about the work of the foundation and what exactly they're doing. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and especially Michael for this interesting presentation.